All right, let's look at Galatians chapter 5 and verse 1. It says, "Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage." Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ hath made us free, and be not entangled again in the yoke of bondage. Now, this yoke of bondage that Paul was talking about was the Old Testament law. Don't be entangled back in those things that Christ has saved you out of. But it can also apply to anything else, anything that would hold you back. And this morning, I'd like to focus on the one word, the main word in this scripture today, and that is liberty, being the July 4th weekend and all. And this July 4th is very important to our nation and to us as a people. And it's all about liberty. And I think we know what that means. It means to be free. And last night, as I was listening, as I was getting this message ready, I was listening to the sounds of fireworks going off down the street. Some were seemingly quite close to our house. I guess our neighbors really had some loud ones. And these fireworks, other than just being beautiful to look at, symbolize the sights and sounds of the battles that were fought to make this country free. When I see military jets fly overhead, I don't get all fearful. I'm actually comforted by that. And to me, it is the sound of freedom. I grew up we weren't that far from an Air Force base, but as a child, and you don't hear it now, but I grew up hearing the sonic booms of jets. Do you remember that? They'd go boom. As children, it didn't scare us. We knew what it was all about. We knew that those were we called them Army men. Well, we were little. But that was the Air Force, and to me, it was a comforting sound. Not only are these sounds the sounds of freedom, of liberty and freedom for us, but also for the entire world. The entire world has been a beneficiary of the freedoms that were gained in this country. And if you don't believe me, just go to World War II. All of Europe would have been under the control of Hitler had it not been for the assistance of this nation. And in many ways, they owe their freedom to that. It is also a reminder that this freedom we enjoy in this country comes at a price. Let us look at the beginning of liberty in this country. Of course, we celebrate the 4th of July, right? That's where it began, right? The 4th of July, the Declaration of Independence. Because on the 4th of July, the Continental Congress of the Colonies formally adopted the Declaration of Independence. However, John Adams afterward would never go and speak anywhere on the 4th of July because it was actually voted on the 2nd of July. So in John Adams' mind, that's when freedom began. That's when the Declaration of Independence went into effect. It is interesting to note that both John Adams and the writer of the document, Thomas Jefferson, died on the 4th of July, 1826, some 50 years later than the acceptance of the Declaration of Independence. Isn't that amazing? But really, this is not where it all began. On April 19th, 1775, was the first military exchange of fire between the British Empire and what would become the United States later on. Ruth and I had the pleasure, we didn't go there for this reason. We went to Boston because my brother lives in Boston, and we were going to go to New York City, and we would just hang out with my brother for a couple of days and then go to New York City from there. But while we were there, Ruth wanted to do something. And I said, let's go to Lexington and Concord, where it all began. And it's a beautiful little community, Lexington is. And the first skirmish happened on the village green. Now, Ruth and I stood there on that same plot of land where the British regulars showed up, and the militiamen of Lexington, the Minutemen, they come out and they all stood there with their weapons in formation. And nobody knows exactly what happened, but they were told to disperse by the British soldiers. And the militiamen really were about to disperse, and then someone ended up firing a shot. And of that battle, which began because of that shot, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who, well, fun fact number one, happens to be a distant relative of mine, believe it or not. I think it was, you'd have to ask my sister-in-law. She did all the research, but it was like an 8th great-grandmother was his mother. So actually, my family is pretty much directly related to Ralph Waldo Emerson. That makes me feel good, even though he was a transcendentalist. He wrote these words, "By the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled. Here once the embattled farmer stood and fired the shot heard round the world." The shot heard round the world. That's where it began. They started out on the green in Lexington, and then it went to the North Bridge in Concord. And at that bridge, these farmers and townsmen made their stand against the British soldiers and actually caused the British soldiers to retreat. And they began that retreat, and then the militia was reinforced by other militias along the way, and they chased them all the way back to Boston. And that was the beginning of the fight for freedom. And the men that died on that April morning in that fight for freedom and liberty, to them we owe a great debt for those who stood their ground that day for freedom. This was the beginnings of the colony's breakaway from England and King George III. I actually have a connection with King George III as well. I am just Joe Patriot, aren't I? The house that we were raised in, because I'm from back in that area. I'm from New Hampshire. It's just a couple hours north of there. Our house was built in the 1700s. And the original property deeded to the house that I lived in as a child was deeded by King George III to the original owner of that house. So, fun fact number 2. Now, almost 250 years later, the fight seems to be not for gaining freedom, but to preserve it. The freedoms bought and paid for by those patriots have now been twisted and used as a context to engage in all sorts of immoral activity and behavior. Despite what the justices of the Supreme Court might say, this is not what they fought for. I wonder if some of them were raised from the dead and could see what has become of things. Would they say, "What have we done?" But that's how freedom and liberty came to be in America. But where did it begin for us in an individual and spiritual sense? Our text today tells us to stand fast in the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free. You see, freedom is a gift to us from God. You know, some people don't know how to receive a gift. You ever try to give something to somebody and immediately they go for their wallet or something? "Here, let me pay you for this." I was on a flight, I think it was to Alaska. There was a man sitting beside me, and this stewardess, you know, in the old days, you just got a meal, but now you got to pay for it. But anyway, so the stewardess was distributing box lunches for a price. So I think it was like $7 or $8 or something like that. And there was cheeses and crackers and whatever, you know, they throw in there. And this man had like $6, and he needed another couple of dollars to, because he didn't want to use a credit card. I don't know if they were using credit cards back then for that, and you had to have cash. And I said, "Hey, let me give you a couple of dollars so you can eat." And he was kind of a proud man. He goes, no, I can't do that. I just can't. I said, "Let me give this to you. I don't want anything from you. I just want to give you these $2. And the best thing that you can give me is just go ahead and eat it." And yeah, he wouldn't take it. He's of the old school. If he can't buy it, then he'll just do without, I suppose. Some people don't know how to receive a gift. Shortly after the military skirmishes of the Civil War were over, not long, this man by the name of Sam somehow got an audience with President Lincoln. And Sam had become a successful businessman rather rapidly, and he had been a slave. But since he had been set free, he had gone into business, and he knew what he was doing, evidently, and he was able to build a business. And he came to the White House to see President Lincoln, and they let him in, and he saw him, and he said, "Sir, I would like to pay for my freedom." And President Lincoln took him to the window where off in the distance was Arlington Cemetery. The man's name was Sam, and he said, "Sam, your freedom was paid for by the blood of the men that lay in those graves. There isn't enough money on the face of the earth that could pay for your freedom, because it was paid for in blood." Salvation that we get from God, it cannot be worked for or paid for by man. It is a gift of God by the sacrifice of his Son, Jesus. So many people think they got to do this or they got to do that in order to be made acceptable to God. There's only one way you can be made acceptable to God, and that is to ask Jesus into your life, because Jesus is the one that is acceptable, and he paid for your salvation with his blood on the cross of Calvary.